With graphics like that, this guy must work out.
Alright folks, I'm going to walk you through the steps I take to get from a concept that a customer gives me to an actual product that I end up building for them. So I'll post a picture here, and this is what the customer actually gave me. And then I measured the area that they wanted this shelving unit to go in, and then I had to get into I usually don't do this in Excel. I just kind of chicken scratch it out. So I am not a professional cabinet builder. So I know the guys that do this for a living probably have some fancy software that they put it into, but I'm going to kind of go through the logic steps that I go through to build everything. And then you got to make sure that you understand what size wood you're going to be using. So if you're using 3/4 inch panel board or 1/2 inch panel board, all your measurements got to take the width of the board you're using into account. So basically what this is a 9-foot wide shelving unit that is 7 foot tall. So my facial board is going to be 1.5 inches, which is here. All these are going to be 1.5 inch facial boards. And it'll actually be 2 separate cabinets, or 3 separate cabinets. So there'll be a cabinet here, a cabinet here, 2 towers, and then a base middle cabinet here, and then I'll put shelves in between the 2 towers. So that's what she wanted compared to the picture that she gave me. So it's 7 foot tall, 84 inches tall, 1.5 inch facial boards all the way around. This here will be 3 inches. This isn't to scale, but it's more for me figuring out what size wood I need to cut versus the scale drawings. So what I did is figured out how much my facial board's going to take up space-wise. So if you added all these up in between here, that gave me 12 inches of surface area across the front of the cabinet that's going to be nothing but facial boards. So then I had to divide out what was left to figure out how wide each one of my shelves are going to be. So if I do all that math, it gives me a 24-inch wide opening for each one of my shelves, or each one of my drawers. These yellow parts are drawers. So what I did next is figured out the depth of my cabinet. So standard cabinet's like 24 inches deep, but if you look at the picture, this inset, so this middle cabinet is actually recessed in shorter than the 2 towers. So I went with 18 inches. Now you'll notice there's a 3/4 inch difference in here. If you look down here at your side view, you've got a 3/4 inch facial board, so that's a 1.5 by 3/4 inch. So that's where that 3/4 inches off comes from. So it'll be 23 1/4, 17 1/4, 17 1/4, 23 1/4. The next part is the drawer itself. And even though the cabinet's going to be 24 inches deep, actually inside will be 23 1/4, you want to make your shelf smaller because you got to have room for your hardware for your shelf to slide on, and you want adjustment room. So I went 2 inches smaller. My width is going to be the same for my drawers all the way across because your width up here is the same. Only difference is going to be the depth. The face boards, so you box out your shelf. Your shelf basically, or your drawers basically are a box, and then you attach your facial board to the front of it, but you want it to overlap on top of your facial boards. So I ended up doing 3/4 of an inch over on both sides, which will overlap nicely on the facial board and give me enough room to cover the seams around the drawer. So that gives me the 25.5 inch facial boards. I haven't done those yet. Those will be the last things I do. And then the depth, which is how deep the shelves are, is going to be smaller as well. Actually, scratch that. Let me get back up here. The width is smaller than the width of the cabinet opening, because you've got an inch that's taken up by your slide, your drawer slides. So most drawer slides are a 1/2 inch wide. You've got 2 of them, so that eats up an inch. The other thing I had to account for is I'm using 1/2 inch plywood for these drawers, and the front and the back are going to go inside of the side. So if your sideboards, let's do it like this. That's my sideboard. My front board will be here. So I'll just draw you one side. So this is my 1/2 inch plywood. Front and back is going to be recessed inside of that. There'll be another board on this side, which will be my other side. So I had to account for a 1/2 and a 1/2 plus a 1/2 inch on each side for my rails that the drawer's going to slide on. So that's 2 inches. That's where this 22 comes from. So it'll be 2 inches shorter than the width that I measured out. And then the depth is how deep the shelf goes in, or how deep, let me rephrase that, how deep the drawer will be into the cabinet. And you want to leave about 2.5 to 3 inches there. That way you've got room for adjustments. You don't want your drawer to take up the entire space inside of the cabinet. So that gives you my measurements for all my widths. And then over on the side, I measured all my heights. So it's, sorry about the movement, it's going to be 7 foot tall. I got a 1.5 inch top. Each one of these between the shelves is only going to be 1 inch. So I don't want to eat up a lot of room there. So 1 inch boards. 3.5 inch kick plate, which is the bottom portion. And then I just took what was left and divided out evenly for each one of my slots for my drawers, and then the remainder is how big this upper door is going to be. So it ended up being 34 inches. Each one of my shelf openings will be 10 inches. So you want about 1.25 inch playroom in here, top to bottom. So that gave me 8 3/4 will be each one of my drawers. And then this is my face setting, or my face drawer facing, and you want it to overlap on top. The thing you got to remember is this is only 1 inch, so you've only got a 1/2 inch overlap on the top and the bottom. So you got to take that into account. I made it to where it was only like 3/8 of an inch overlap, basically. You don't want to make your facings too big. You need a little bit of room between your drawers. That way you've got some wiggle room. So that's what I ended up making my drawer facings. And then down here at the bottom, I did my towers, basically a side view of this cabinet. So this is the middle portion. Notice it's not as deep. It's only 18 inches, 3/4. That's my face piece. There's my kick panel down here. This will be a 3.5 inch. Overall 37.5 tall. And then 24 inches wide by 7 foot tall. Got a 3.5 inch plate here with a 3/4 inch face. So that is how I come up with the measurements. And like I said, I usually just try to chicken scratch draw this out, but this is one of the larger custom cabinet builds I've done. So I did a little more measuring. The other cabinet that I'm building is a coffee bar, and this is 46 inches wide and 35 tall. So on this, there's going to be a countertop. That other cabinet isn't going to have a countertop, but this one is. So you want your top plate or your top facial board to be taller to account for the overlap that you're going to have with your cabinet or with your countertop. And then basically what I did is same thing I did before, 3.5 inches for my kick plate, 1.5 and 2 inches for my fascial boards. And then once I get the overall figure figured out, I basically build from the outside in. So I start with the base cabinet itself, then I put my fascial boards on, and then I put in the width of the openings, or the size of these openings is what's left over. And then I figure out how to build my drawers or my shelves, and then I add the fascial pieces at the very end, which is just going to be the overlap that goes over the top of these openings. So on this one's 46 inches wide, 1.5 inches on each side, 3 inches in the middle, because you're going to want 1.5 inches here and 1.5 inches here to keep it symmetrical. Where I talked about the width earlier, your front and back, at least the way I'm building them, is going to go inside the sides. So it's got to be 2 inches smaller, which gives me my width. My face, which is going to be what overlaps, about 3/4 of an inch on both sides, is pretty close to probably a common measurement. So about 21 1/4. And then this is just going to be a trash can pull out. So this will just be one big door here. And this kind of goes along with the same measurements I did for the other one, so I won't go into detail. And here's my side view for this cabinet. So once you get these measurements figured out, basically your next step is to figure out what materials you're going to need, how much of each one. I'm using 1/2 inch for all of my drawers. My sides, all these are going to be 3/4 inch plywood. My fascial boards will be 3/4 inch. This is paint grade, so I'll probably use MDF for my fascial boards. They're a lot easier to do your routing without having to backfill. Most plywood's not going to route real well. It'll leave gaps that you'll have to backfill. And it's also a lot easier to keep it straight. Plywood tends to walk, especially when you're working with large sections. So I used, and I posted a picture of the 2 different types of wood that I bought. I'm using 1/2 inch. All these ones in yellow I already have cut. So next step will be buying my 3/4 inch to cut my outsides. So my towers, I'm going to need 4 of these. One here, one here, one here, and one here. Like I said, this will be 3 cabinets. I'm going to need 2 of these. One here and one here. They will only go this tall though. And then on my coffee bar, I'm going to need 2 of these, just one on each one of the outsides. So in reality, I should be able to get one piece of 3/4 inch to get both of these and both of the coffee bar pieces, and I'll need 2 sheets of 3/4 inch to get 2 of these, because they're 24 inches wide. I'll just rip it in half and then cut a foot off of my 4x8 sheet, which should give me both of my towers. So the tough part is figuring out how to lay out. Getting the measurements that you need is the first step, which is what I just went through. Then trying to figure out what's most effective. If you got a 4x8 sheet of plywood, how can you cut that up to get the most use out of that sheet of plywood? So basically I bought 3 sheets of 1/2 inch and everything in yellow, with the exception of the facings. I already cut the fronts, backs, and the 2 sides, and the bottom piece with the plywood that I bought. So I had 2 sheets of basically 1/4 inch laminate board and 3 sheets of 1/2 inch plywood, and everything in yellow's been cut. So I've got everything but the fascial boards for those. So now I'll need to go through and cut all of my fascial pieces and my sides. And with the exception of this cabinet here, this will need a bottom, just this section, and I'll need a bottom here and a bottom here. None of these are going to need bottoms because they all have drawer slides in them. And then I'll have some shelves here. So I'll show you where I'm at. This is really the toughest part, at least in my experience, is trying to figure out exactly how wide to measure everything, and then taking into account how wide each piece of lumber is. Like I said, I work from the overall measurement inward. So start with what you need the space you need to fit it in, and then slowly build your cabinet from the largest piece down to the smallest piece. So your outside frame of your cabinet, taking into account how wide your wood is, your facial pieces that go on there, which will then give you how big your openings are. And then from there, remember, figure out your slide pieces. So whatever kind of track system you're using, or drawer slides, you need to account for that space. Like I said, most of them are a 1/2 inch wide, so 1 inch total. And then you got to figure out how you plan on lapping your boards. So you may decide to put your fronts and backs on the outside of your sides. If you do that, then your side pieces need to be 1 inch shorter, and your fronts and backs need to be 1 inch longer. So just depends on how you put it together. But to me, this is the toughest part of building a cabinet, is figuring out all these intricate measurements, and then how to lay it out where you get the most use out of your plywood is probably the next step. Toughest part. Putting it together is not that big a deal. And usually, for me anyway, like I said, I don't do a ton of these, probably a handful of them a year. I'll probably have to go back. I usually build like one of these, so I may build this middle cabinet and fully assemble it to make sure that all my measurements are correct, and I may have to end up going back and correcting something, but for the most part these usually work. If it is off, it's just a fraction. And then also remember, you can't take your piece of plywood and measure all your measurements on there, because you're using a table saw or a skill saw. Your blade is going to eat up a 1/16 to 1/8 of an inch of wood. So if nothing else, make your cuts for like your width. Don't measure everything out and then cut along those lines, because you're going to end up eating up a portion of that. So it's best to make your largest cuts and then cut all your individual pieces one at a time, to make sure that you account for what your blade's going to eat up. So hope this helps.
This guy needs to be a poster child for birth control. If you like that video, hit subscribe.